And now what is the British hope? Look forward but a generation or two. Our sons, our grandsons will see it. Millions upon millions of British subjects living on their own soil under their own flag. The mind of Canada shall be one mind. The voice of Canada shall be one voice. That as far as she is concerned, she will forever preserve and maintain our glorious empire.
January 1st, 1900, the first day of the new century, the first Canadian shots in the first war. 6,000 miles from home, these sons of empire, fighting the Boers.
They were a marvel to the Cape Town people when the contingent arrived. At the Grand Hotel, the most expensive in the city, some 75 privates dined on Wednesday evening when champagne flowed like dishwater. People fancied that Canada must be a gold mine.
The Union for War has come suddenly, swiftly. 6 months ago, we were not thinking of it. Today, it is an accomplished fact. The man who did the deed was the Right Honorable Joseph Chamberlain. If certain colonial premiers and colonial cabinets hesitated, the colonial secretary knew how to force their hands. The men of Strathcona's horse. They are the lion's whelps, made strong and sturdy by roaming over the lion's preserves. When they meet the enemy, the impact will be such as might be caused were Cromwell's Ironsides to charge once again. For example, in one troop are to be found Mr. Beresford, cousin of the Marquis of Waterford and formerly in the Navy, Mr. Shaw, the son of an English baronet, Mr. Warren, a son of Colonel Warren, Royal Horse Artillery, Mr. O'Brien, a relative of Lord Inchiquin, Honourable Mr. Cochrane, a son of Lord Dundonald, and Lord Seymour, a son of the Marquis of Hertford.
And so to Paardeberg, and the end of that.
Great sky, distant treetops, reflected the red glare of the burning ammunition wagons and carts that had been fired on by our shells. Great columns of brown smoke rose in the air, only to mingle with the sickly greenish-yellow smoke of the deadly lyddite. The rattle of musketry, the odor of burning flesh came through the trees on the evening wind, floating from the Boers' lager, while the flare of artillery lighted up the valley. Quite close to one another lay 4 of our Canadian boys, all dead.
And so to the epilogue, the other voice.
Why were we engaged in that war? Because it was just? Because it was necessary? Because of public opinion? Every French-Canadian newspaper opposed it. The fixed intention of that megalomaniac Chamberlain is to go down in history as the builder of the empire. He could well become the loosener of the empire.
Greatest country I ever struck. There are hundreds of towns and cities between Winnipeg and Moose Jaw, and it takes a rich man to own the ground under his shoes. Wherever there's a siding, that's a town. And where there's a siding and a tank, that's a city.
The unit is the store, and the store is simply a magnified packing box. The merchant likes to have the front boarding carried up to hide the roof. In fact, he likes it ugly. By and by, people build houses to live in on a hotel, and naturally, the packing box style of architecture continues. The trail of early commercial is all over these towns, and necessarily prosaic lives are made more prosaic and featureless.
It's already 23 years since I first opened fire against barbarisms, Anglicisms, and all the other isms whose eruption in our language threaten its disappearance to the last vestige. Useless effort. The Canadiens are incorrigible.
The Women's Literary Club of Toronto has been disbanded to form a Women's Suffrage Association.
I am invited from Paris to give lecture to Art Students League. I want picture of a horse to show that animal is beautiful because every part made for function. In Paris, I would show woman, but in Toronto, I show a horse.
Our Canada, young, strong, and free, whose scepter stretches far, whose hills look down on either sea and front the polar star. God bless our mighty forest land of mountain, lake, and river, whose loyal sons from strand to strand sing Canada forever.
An earnest and patriotic, but at the same time an unhappy attempt has been made to boom our literature. Like all booms, it has proved unsatisfactory. We're beginning to realize that to scream at one another that we have a literature is not going to give us one.
It is said that the girls of the smaller cities of Canada are in danger of losing their frank charm through their anxiety to know life and grasp its problems, and that they're seeking such knowledge in the pages of the French novelists.
Is it the lack of money that makes Canada so poor a book market? The bald truth is that Canada has the money but would rather spend it on whiskey. What chance has Canada of raising a Sir Walter Scott? The new Sir Walter is probably tramping the streets of Toronto today looking for something to do.
In our schools today, the examinations begin. Scribble, scribble. Nothing oral, nothing of interest, nothing by way of supplement for the enlightened mind. There is no time. The examined scribble for bare life.
The principal occupation of Austria is getting ostrich feathers.
Oliver Cromwell was a man who was put in prison for his interference in Ireland. When he was in prison, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress and married a lady called Mrs. O'Shea.
The two most famous volcanoes of Europe are Sodom and Gomorrah.
In my day, the normal school was sort of educational pork packing factory. It gathered into itself the raw material, rushed it through the machine, scraped off some of the ignorance, but not much, and there stood the manufactured article. I was captured from my native lair, soaked, scraped, and so flung.
We are striving, might and main, to give thousands of young women the education of ladies, save the mark, and permitting them to starve upon the pittance of the sweating house as teachers. And for the result in the schools.
Aim of geography, ma'am? The aim of geography is to fit a man for the business of life and lead him to prepare for death and the other world.
We should not eat so many bone-making foods as flesh-forming foods because if we did, we would have too many bones, which would make us look funny.
Missionaries are people who get money.
A gentleman is a fellow that has a watch chain and loves Jesus.
Canada's a bloody place for a poet to live his life in.
How utterly destitute of all light and charm are the intellectual conditions of our people and the institutions of our public life. How barren, how barbarous.
If I were English, Canada should love me like the deuce. But I was born in Canada, so what the hell's the use?
W.C. Cullum, north of Regina, thrash 48 bushels wheat to the acre. S.E. Potter, Moose Jaw, reports 4,000 bushels wheat, averaging over 30 bushels. And J.G. Reed, south of Moose Jaw, 100 bushels to the acre.
What we need is a steadfast, determined policy that we shall smelt our own iron and steel.
From one of the leading hotels of the city of St. John, New Brunswick, at noon on Thursday, May 1st of the present year, 1913, slowly emerged a venerable figure, the cynosure of many eyes. Clad in a fur-trimmed topcoat protecting him from the inclemency of a stormy day, a silk hat surmounting his silvery locks, his shoulders stooped by the burden of years, but his glance still keen and alert, recognizing old friends with a cordial bow, his whole air was one of extreme distinction. Even a stranger would have felt that he was in the presence of no ordinary man. It was Sir Charles Tupper, Baronet, the sole surviving father of Confederation, on his way to the Empress of Ireland.
Leaving his homeland and an age behind him. The father's work was done.
For 400 miles in the rough, shaggy region between Port Arthur and Winnipeg,
there's hardly a sign that humanity exists on the earth's face. Only rocks and endless woods of scrubby pine and the occasional strange gleam of water, and night and the wind, and then Winnipeg. Over this country there are thrown little pools of that flood of European immigration that pours through Winnipeg. The interminable, bleak, thin rain took the gold out of the wheat and the brown from the distant fields. It seemed to me that the prairie would be a lonely place to live in, especially if it rained. But the people tell me they get homesick if they go away for a time.
In the morning after sunup, we continued our joyous journey down the Athabasca.
Another traveler, Mrs. Arthur Murphy.
The Indian woman on board is returning once more to her native north, with its hidden worlds and yet unhappened things. I tell you that some secret presage lies upon this land, and one who has sensed it must come back again and again to its intangible allurement. It is not for me to know the reason or to tell you, for I am southern born. Mrs. Jack Fish receives us, seated in her wigwam, because she is very old and quite blind. Truly, she might pass for the honorable great-grandmother of all Canada. Is the kind lady going to the north to find a man? No, the kind lady has white hair, and her man is dead. Ah, well, ah, well. It was different when she was young. Then every woman's skin was full of oil, and for her there were many braves. The factor fills her lap with a heap of pungent tobacco, and we go on. The religion of the gentle Nazarene has cut the fighting sinews of the Indians. That is why our honorable great-grandmother whimpers for tobacco instead of hurling us over the riverbank and throwing her campfire on top of us. I could almost find it in my heart to wish that she had.
For nearly 200 miles, the train pants through the homeless grandeur of the Rockies and the Selkirks. Yet desolation is not the final impression. There is beauty here. At length, for the first time in Canada, the real beauty that is always too sudden for mortal eyes. I sat and considered the nature of the country in this continent. It is an empty land. To love the country here is like embracing a wraith. A European can find nothing to satisfy the hunger of his heart. The air is too thin to breathe. He requires haunted woods and the friendly presence of ghosts. There walk as yet no ghosts of lovers here. This is the essence of the grey freshness and brisk melancholy of this land. And for all the charm, it is also the secret of a European's discontent. For it is possible at a pinch to do without gods. But one misses the dead.
For not much longer now, O doomed young man. The dead will not lie here, but ghosts will walk. You see them round you, living in their thousands, the ghosts to be, and you are one of them. It is 1913. It is Rupert Brooke.
I stood almost in the center of this huge battlefield in the closing hours of a somber March day. To the right, Vimy Ridge rose slowly to the skyline, flaring up at its northern edge into the steeper slopes of the Pimple. At the base of the sloping terraces that came down from the hilltop, the little river Souchez ran, turning northeasterly through the gorge and on toward Lens. This little stream has known its current dammed by the wedged bodies of dead men. Its banks have brimmed with human blood. Over this area, for a distance of miles, the Canadian Corps had planted its camps. But on the March evening when I saw it, it was bleak and cheerless beyond the power of words to express. Everywhere the wreckage of battle, the debris of destruction. A grim and melancholy expanse. yet withal holy ground. For here, men by the tens of thousands had died for mankind. If the dead gave their lives without bitterness, and the living are consoled, Canada, the common mother of both, is richer for all time for their sacrifice. 1,000 years from now, Canadian youths will read the stories of their deeds with kindling eyes.
John Defoe, the man of the free press. And John Defoe in preface to those words.
Though the articles reveal their journalistic origin alike in form and in a certain evanescent timeliness already partly out of date, it has not been considered advisable to recast them.
1919, already an evanescence, out of date, stained by the homebred poisons, the other war, Defoe's war with the rest.
In the evening, I went to the St. James Street Methodist Church to attend a recruiting rally.
James Wordsworth, the man of peace. A letter to his wife.
Really, Lucy, if I wasn't on principle opposed to spectacular methods, I would have gotten up and denounced the whole thing as a perversion, a damnable perversion, if you like, of the teachings of Jesus. War anthems favor the Hebrew prophets. War anthems and hymns with war phrases sung as war hymns. It was significant that there were no New Testament lessons.
French Canadians have refused to play their part in this war, being the only known race of white men to quit.
Will you permit me to ask if you have taken the trouble ever to read Regulation 17 affecting the Ontario schools?
Laurier, the aging Laurier.
They try to excuse themselves by alleging domestic grievances.
If it has come to this, that the language of the race to which I belong is proscribed.
The excuse, if true, would be contemptible. In the face of this emergency, domestic questions must stand.
I want to speak to my fellow countrymen in the province of Ontario. I want every child in the province of Ontario to receive an English education. But when I ask that every child of my own race should receive an English education, will you refuse us the privilege of education also in the language of our mothers and of our fathers?
You can do precisely as you please, and we shall do whatever may be necessary. When we demonstrate, as we shall, that a solid Quebec is without power...
Yes, it is now felt that conscription was a failure. But the blind, the fools, and the miscreants who coerce the government to coerce still hold the whip high. And now they are strengthened by those other blind fools and miscreants who at this moment are stirring up the people of Quebec to violence and riot.
Almost the last words. Yet there were these to the young. The nation stood, the nation must go on.
Many problems rise before you. Problems of race division, problems of creed differences, problems of economic conflict, problems of national duty and aspiration. Let me tell you that for the solution, you have a safe guide, an unfailing light. If you remember that faith is better than doubt, and love is better than hate.
Canada is the greatest country under the stars and stripes.
The price of our steel products is fixed in New York. Our Nova Scotia miners obey the orders of a magnate in Indianapolis.
At it again in the world beyond the war, paunchy with fat and bulging with our promise, biting the hand that pours the dollars in. Archibald McMicken tells the horrid tale.
The university curriculums, textbooks, methods of teaching, Greek letter societies, class organizations, the big initial on the football sweater, and the curious war cries known as college yells, all are borrowings from the Americans. Our native game, lacrosse, is dead. Cricket is a sickly exotic. But baseball is everywhere. So is the chewing gum machine. Our fashions and clothes are decreed by New York. Our youth develop knobby shoulders, semi-detachable trousers with permanent cuffs, or hourglass waists, according to the whims of New York. No Canadian ever invents a new form of slang. We have imported Thanksgiving Day, Labor Day, Arbor Day, Mother's Day. And so soon as our cousins south of the line decide to celebrate Grandmother's Day, we shall unhesitatingly adopt it, too.
And Arthur Phelps concludes.
Let any English-speaking Canadian sit down in his corner and divest himself of whatever is American in his origin and impulse, and intellectually he'll look like a skinned rabbit.
You farmers want to keep your boys at home. Don't let them go up to the city. Keep them on the farm. The temptations is more pure.
Never again, Senator. The boys have seen Paris. The East is fat. But in the West, the post-war revels ended, the piper to pay. The rains cease. Equally the wheels fall still, the land lies gray. The thousands gather at silent factory gates. The tumbleweed blows over the blown seed. The dirty 30s, land of the dry wind now. Anne Marriott tells of it.
They said, sure, it'll rain next year. When that was dry, well, next year anyway. Then next. But still the metal hardness of the sky softened only in mockery. When lightning slashed and twanged, and thunder made the hot head surge with pain, never a drop fell. Always hard yellow sun conquered the storm. Relief.
God, we tried hard to stand alone.
Relief.
Well, we can't let the kids go cold.
They trudge away to school, swinging half-empty lard pails, to shiver in the schoolhouse, unpainted 7 years, learning from a blue-lipped girl almost as starved as they.
Well, let's forget politics. Forget the wind, our enemy.
Let's forget, farmer boys. Let's put on a dance tonight.
The small, uneven schoolhouse floor scraped under big work boots. Gasoline lamps whistled. One Hungarian boy snapped at a shrill guitar. A Swede from out north of town squeezed an accordion dry. And a Scotch woman from Ontario made the piano dance. Yet, in the morning, air peppered thick with dust. All the night's happiness seemed far away, unreal, like a lying mirage or the icy white glare of the alkali slough.
We are going to see that the people of Alberta are properly cared for.
Out of the dust cloud, Aberhart the prophet.
Where does all the money come from? We don't use money. Then where does all the credit come from? Why, out of the end of a fountain pen. Social credit is a scientific principle that can be easily understood. Wouldn't I like to have some of those members of Parliament with me for about 5 minutes who claim it's not workable?
We didn't have to wear gunny sacks for clothes and eat gophers like they did down around Youngstown. But I had neighbors who were living on skim milk and potatoes. Then along came Aberhart, and I saw he was right.
No more for now. Sorry.
The total monthly cost of unemployment in Winnipeg is just now at the rate of $182,000 a month. I do not believe that anyone could begin to picture the moral degradation and the mental hardships that are involved in such figures as these.
Male piece workers in one large Montreal factory average 16 cents per hour. One man of 10 years' experience worked 70 hours per week to earn $7. In one factory, all workers, men and women together, averaged 25 cents per hour. The banks enjoin on the pay envelopes.
Think of tomorrow. Divide your pay in two. Take what you need to live, put the balance in safety.
And the newspapers advertise,
help a fellow citizen. Buy a smart suit yourself and donate your old one to some needy man.
Into the work camps now, ye hopeful young. See Canada, ye riders of the rods. the empty bellies and the empty boxcars. And then the marching feet, the golden words.
What is the purpose of this march? We have taken care of our unemployed as well as any country in the world. Agitators, representing a form of government we will not tolerate, representing communism, got into the work camps to destroy them. You men are the victims of that agitation. You ask for work and wages. You haven't shown much anxiety to get work. It is the one thing you don't want. What you want is adventure in the hope of overawing authority and upsetting the government.
Mr. Bennett made promises galore. He would end unemployment. He would abolish doles. He would blast his way into the markets of the world. Has he accomplished any of these things?
Had he, Mackenzie King, when rescue came? Mars, the old rescuer, who had not slept.
I had to find words, Mr. Speaker, in which to express Canada's foreign policy. I would use those words which the Apostle Paul addressed to the Romans when he said to them, "If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men."
Not possible. Another generation grown and ripe. Open the factory doors, pluck men from doles. The war, unfinished, must be fought again. September 7th, 1939.
I have never doubted that when the fatal moment came, the free spirit of the Canadian people would assert itself in the preservation and defense of freedom as it did a quarter of a century ago. I have, however, been anxious that when the inevitable hour came, our people should be as one from coast to coast.
As one. The golden, blood-splashed names go down forever. The far-off places where they sleep as one. Bidding us forget? No, bidding us remember the ancient sores reopened. The newer shame.
For a moment, if you wish to understand me and the French Canadians, reverse the picture, if you please. Try to imagine Canada as part of a French empire and yourselves as a British minority. Would you be as enthusiastic in defending that empire as would be the Canadians of French descent? Think of the position in which we are placed. Think of the concessions which the French Canadians have been making to bring about and maintain unity in this great land of ours. We are here in the House of Commons, all friends, and as members of a family capable of understanding the truth. Where are your concessions, you British Canadians, in favor of the French Canadians? What have you ever done to preserve unity between the two great races in Canada?
I have wept bitter tears over the degradation forced upon us. I have watched the sorry spectacle of human beings in a sworn democracy treated like cattle.
Our population of Japanese origin, Mr. Speaker, is here by our consent. We accepted them as permanent residents of this country. They were no more responsible for the military aggression of the Japanese government than any other citizen of Canada. And despite the way we have treated them, despite the fact that we denied them the rights enjoyed by every other citizen, not one disloyal act has been committed by any Canadian-born Japanese.
To Custodian of Japanese Properties of Vancouver, BC. Dear Sir, we cannot understand the official claim that it is necessary to sell over our heads the home from which we were forcibly ejected. This house, bought out of our slender earnings, represents our stake in this country of our birth. We do not quarrel with military measures, but this act can scarcely be in accord with any war measure. please hasten to assure us that our house is inviolable. Thank you. Yours truly, T.M. Kitagawa, for Mr. and Mrs. E. Kitagawa.
Mr. It is a Bureau Kitagawa, registration number 01842. Dear sir, the proposed liquidation is a general one and not only applies to your particular property. I am unable to give you the assurance asked for.
Dear sir, the reason for writing you at all was because the government had vested in you the final authority to sell or not to sell our homes, and perhaps I took a vain hope gamble. You who deal in lifeless figures, files, and statistics could never measure the depth of hurt and outrage dealt out to those of us who love this land. It is because we are Canadians that we protest the violation of our birthright. You have piled indignity upon indignity on us. You have sought to sully and strain our loyalty. But I'm telling you, you can't do it. If all fails and you are upheld in your purpose, then kindly send us our proceeds that we may personally invest them in something solid. Victory bonds, for instance.
Above all, we must have orderly control.
Prescribes Frank Scott.
First, we must give away all the assets of war. Stores, trucks, equipment, goods of every kind, and all the factories built with public money. These must be channeled toward monopolies which will most surely exploit them. We must show how carefully and consciously we can steer toward disaster, letting the forces of anarchy return.
Into the 50s, on toward today, the sharp-tongued poets snapping at our heels, blackness behind, the mushroom cloud above, star-spangled airwaves beating at our ears.
This sweet music that I hear, is it soap or is it beer?
Inquires Frank Scott again.
Do I owe the string quartet to foulness of the breath or sweat? When the Chopin prelude comes, will it help massage the gums? And will Sirkin play encores mixing Bach and baseball scores? Damn, they've cut the Bach finale. Your world's my world, Mr. Dolly.
Joining the Confederation was a good thing for Newfoundland, and the terms were fair enough.
We can't see the small wood for trees, and we know that the seafaring folk would never have sunk to their knees if they hadn't been utterly broke.
But I felt sick to my stomach, I can tell you, on that day we walked up to the centre block on Parliament Hill for the signing.
The 10th of the sisters comes to take potluck. Onward with all, reluctant sister, now. Tell us, O seers and travelers, what we are.
You have asked me an enormous question.
Dick Diesbecker.
Now I must tell you. You are the quiet bays and the lonely shadows of the firs. You are the rocky mountains, white with the snows of centuries. You are the United Empire loyalists, seigneurs, habitants, and priests, the fathers of Confederation.
A dull people, enamored of childish games.
Irving Layton.
Deferring to beadle and censor. Not ashamed for this, but given over to horseplay, the making of money.
You are Noranda, Braylon and Lakeshore Mines, Hollinger and Sullivan and Frood. You are Dominion Bridge and Cockshut Plough, International Nickel and Massey Harris, Shawinigan, Beauharnois, BC Power.
Strange, haunting, and full of exciting sounds are the names of Canada.
Bruce Hutchison.
The name itself is strange enough, like the cry of some wild seabird. Some say it came from the Iroquois, some from the Algonquin. There is also the legend of the Spanish sailors who, failing to find gold mines, cried, "Acá, nada." There is nothing of value here.
As I snoop round my old hometown on the prairies, I hear a good deal about people I grew up with.
Wallace Stegner.
Most of it concerns how they married an American millionaire or made it big as geologists for Standard Oil, or tour the country every year giving piano recitals, or have become newspaper publishers in Regina, or teachers, or doctors, or executives somewhere else. Always somewhere else. White mud has become an exporter of manpower.
Various sources of information had led me to believe that our journey across Canada would be a succession of jolly and informative encounters with folksy characters sitting on benches, stones, logs, etc.
Edward McCourt sets out across the land.
I had confidently expected to meet in the Maritimes tarry old yarns, spinning salts exuding local color and rum fumes. And the West, I knew, was overrun by leather-skinned, crinkly-eyed farmers ready at the click of a tape recorder to sum up in a succinct phrase, punctuated by a stream of tobacco juice, the essential spirit of the prairies.
She's the next year's country, son. Say, let's go gather up a bucket of them gall-darn hailstones and make a freezer ice cream.
I never met any of them. Perhaps they were all off making tapes for the CBC.
And yet, oh friend McCourt, to quote yourself, quoting your Gaelic friend,
she bade us farewell in Cape Breton with a blessing we liked.
May your road rise with you. May the wind blow always at your back. May the good Lord hold you in the hollow of his hand.
How shall we speak of Canada, Mackenzie King dead? The mother's boy in the lonely room with his dog, his medium and his ruins.
Frank Scott. Once more, Edward McCourt rejoins.
How, after all, do we explain to foreigners the attempt of a prime minister whom we kept in office for 21 years to build in the middle of a Canadian cow pasture a ruined Greek temple from the door of a 19th century bank? How do we explain it to ourselves? The girl from the Department of External Affairs who showed us around Kingsmere shivered a little in the warm sunlight.
If he put up all this junk thinking it was art, that's awful. But if he put it up because he really liked it, because it did something to him, my God.
I found Kingsmere immensely comforting, for it assures us that the ultra-conventional little horse trader, who in our more despondent moments we equate with the national character, was at times, perhaps during certain phases of the moon, a nonconformist beyond the wildest imaginings of the most nihilistic, pot-smoking pad dweller among us. If Kingsmere, through Mackenzie King, reflects a facet of the national character, there is hope for us yet.
The cadence of the typical Canadian voice is different from the Americans. It is half nasal twang, a quarter Scots, quarter Irish, and has a rather sad tone, as if something once dear and now lost and forgotten is still being endlessly regretted. There is in Canada, too, somewhere seated on the throne of power, a man who continually says no to life.
Anybody ever really heard that voice? Anybody give that answer now, today? What of the voice Jack Priestley did not hear?
Joual is a boneless language. It is to say joual instead of cheval, horse. It is to talk as horses would talk if they had not long since plumbed for silence and the smile of Fernandel.
I remember the first letter.
André Laurendeau.
It was from a simple lay brother of one of our far-off religious communities. Thus was born Brother Anonymous.
It is a symptom of our non-existence as French Canadians. Our inability to assert ourselves, our refusal to accept the future, our obsession with the past are all reflected in joual, our real language. We live joual because our souls are impoverished. The whole French Canadian society is foundering. If we are to be saved, energetic measures are called for. The axe. We must work with the axe.
Why Brother Anonymous? In a sense, he was the first come, no matter who, of the army of brothers. He incarnated the best of our own, all those whom we never hear.
I make jokes, I play the clown, I pass out insults, of course, but But that's not all. The main thing is that I love the people hereabouts, the French Canadians of my province. I'm so much one of them, rooted in this land. I make a fuss because I don't want my people to miss the boat. We mustn't miss the boat. We're far enough behind anyhow.
Oh, Goldwyn Smith, the Siberian mammoth wakes. The point of fire has eaten through the ice. The glacier moves.
All this Canadian excitement of newness and hope, this bustle of aspirations, you can sense most potently in Montreal. A slight suggestion of violence hangs in the air. Here you can understand what it means to stand on the edge of a new world.
The die is cast in Canada.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
There are two ethnic and linguistic groups. Each is too strong and deeply rooted in the past, too firmly bound to a mother culture to be able to swamp the other. But if the two will collaborate, Canada could become a privileged place where the federalist form of government, which is the government of tomorrow's world, will be perfected.
Tomorrow's world. And we of this 100th year, we of this quarrelsome, so well-loved land, kicked in the ribs by those who love her best. What do we fear but not to be fulfilled? How are we small but by the measure of our hope?
Drive the highway from coast to coast, by snow-crowned mountains and wide empty spaces, and the tumbled chaos of rock and lake and forest, and the tumultuous surging life of great cities. And you are aware every mile you drive that less than a day's journey north begins one of the last great wildernesses of earth, a wilderness which dwarfs into utter insignificance the narrow band of settlement.
Even in the northernmost islands of the Arctic archipelago, less than 400 miles from the North Pole, during the short Arctic summer one may find veritable rock gardens, gay with purple Lapland rhododendrons and loco weeds, with arnicas and yellow Arctic poppies, with creamy white avens, and masses of purple, white, or yellow saxifrages and tiny rock ferns.
I tell you that some secret presage lies upon this land, its hidden worlds and yet unhappened things.
We are a people subconsciously aware of mighty, imminent forces, subconsciously aware of the gods.
Century, researched and written for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation by Joseph Schul with Frank Underhill. Directed and produced by J. Frank Willis.